Hi, I'm Cici from Counterfire, Cici Washburn, and we have Kridos Pavlou, the Assistant Branch Secretary at Tower Hamlets Unison, talking us today about the national Unison ballot of council workers and school workers and the experience from Tower Hamlets. So Kridos, tell us about your dispute.
Well, it's a national dispute and it's over pay. We've been offered 1.75 by the government, 1.75% by the government. Over the last decade, the last 10 years or so, local government workers have seen their pay in real terms reduced between about 20 to 25%. Now, obviously, if you try to cut that amount in one go, there would have been an outcry. But because it's been cut bit by bit, year by year, with either no pay increase or very small pay increases, which would be below the rate of inflation, in real terms, our pay is decreased dramatically. So effectively now we're working like 1 day a week for free. I think because it was done over a long period of time, there wasn't much of a reaction from workers. I think what's different now is I think the COVID pandemic has had a real impact. People have seen who have been the people that have been running society, who have kept society running throughout the pandemic. And it's tended to be the lower paid people, the frontline people. And I think the 1.75% was seen as a bit of an insult, a bit of a joke, and not something workers or people that I knew in our union thought was a serious reward for the amount of effort that they'd gone through. And in reality, people had risked their own health to ensure service had run through the pandemic. Subsequently, very shortly after we'd heard about the offer, the 1.25 national insurance increase was announced in April. So effectively we get 0.5 of a pay increase, which, you know, we felt was absolutely ridiculous. The National Union clearly felt the same and decided that we would have a national pay ballot. We had an indicative ballot, a consultative ballot, and that was 79% in favour of industrial action. So that's what kind of prompted the official national ballot that started on the 1st of December.
Yeah, thanks, Kridos. And you know, I think you know, that's absolutely right. You know, what you're saying about national insurance increases and workers, I think generally across the country, you know, after the pandemic and being heroes and key workers and keeping the country running, are starting to fight back more and see these below inflation pay offers as an insult. And do you think with the cost of living crisis at the moment and inflation skyrocketing past 6%, like you mentioned, national insurance, are people really angry? You know, are people talking about it a lot?
I think what's happened, we've had kind of, I think the inflation rate is now running at 5.1, which is kind of a 10-year high. Most people in the council have modest homes. They've managed to kind of struggle together a deposit and buy a modest home for themselves. They might be homeowners, but it's fairly modest accommodation, and the mortgage payments take a huge chunk of their income. Now, the increase in mortgage payments, although we're talking about a historic low, that has meant, with the combination of the inflation running at 5.1 and food and fuel have been kind of going at a higher rate of inflation at that, the mortgage payments on top of that has meant that workers have really felt the pinch. And I kind of think that the pandemic has kind of had all of those together have made people quite angry about the pay rise, because people have now, rather than being kind of rewarded, people are now seeing their pay go down. The amount of spare cash that they have is actually less than when the pandemic started. After, like I said previously, people risk their health, literally risk their health to keep services going. I think it's been seen as a real slap in the face. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and you know, a lot of these workers, they're teaching assistants, aren't they? They're people that have been in schools throughout the pandemic. You know, what have the working conditions throughout the pandemic been like? You know, what?
Well, one of the things in local government is the vast majority of the workers are women. It's between about 70 to 75%. And on top of that, they tend to be concentrated in the lower pay grades. So, and they're the ones, as you said, the teaching assistants, the cooks, social workers who've had to go into work as normal. The pandemic, apart from the very kind of severe lockdown, they've been going in during the pandemic, and their working conditions have been, people have been very kind of concerned, haven't they? Because they're not so much concerned for themselves, although they are concerned for themselves. They're concerned that they will pass, if they catch that, they'll pass it on to their family or their children. A lot of people, and again, particularly women, have caring responsibilities both for their children and for their parents. So there's that real concern about going into work, catching something, and then passing it on to people, and it may, you know, it may give them a bad kind of illness, but it may be fatal to those people around them. So a lot of people have been quite stressed about going in. It's had a significant impact on people's mental health, trying to go in, trying to balance kind of their commitment to the job, like if you're a teaching assistant, and knowing that if you're not going to school, that's going to impact on the kids' education, but then having to balance that with your own kind of concerns about your own family, your own parents, your own children. So I think, you know, working conditions at the beginning were very poor in that PPE wasn't provided in the right kind of ways. I think towards the end that was rectified, to be fair, by the schools and the councils. You know, they did provide the stuff and measures were taken, but that still doesn't kind of take away from people's everyday stresses about the pandemic itself.
Yeah, yeah. And do you think there's been any kind of what impact, you know, with the multiple scandals of the Boris Johnson government at the moment?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. You know, I wasn't expecting you to ask that, but absolutely. I mean, I think people who took very seriously the government's advice about not staying, you know, not mingling, unable to go to funerals, weddings getting postponed, then seeing Boris Johnson and his, you know, the people that hang around him having parties, and then mocking the general public, saying, you know, we're having a party and we're breaking the rules. I just think people really felt insulted, because I think what the pandemic has shown is that there really is a community. I know Thatcher said there's no such thing, but there really is a community. People did pull together, people listened to the rules, people followed it, people made sacrifices for the greater good. You know, working people, you know, made lots of sacrifices for the greater good. To see the kind of very wealthy not only breaking it, but kind of mocking the fact that they were breaking it, making a laugh out of it, really honestly made people feel that they were being laughed at, that they, you know, that they were the butt of the joke. That, you know, particularly after Dominic Cummins's ridiculous fantasy tale about testing his eyes, I think this has compounded a kind of view that there's no them and us here. The workers are making sacrifices, sometimes quite literally with their lives, while you know, the rich are kind of having a laugh at our expense.
Yeah, that's what it feels like. And you know, a huge amount, 375,000 workers are being balloted by Unison at the moment. I mean, in Tower Hamlets, what kind of campaign are you running on the ground?
We've put, you know, a lot of publicity out in terms of posters, leaflets. We've held lots of workplace meetings, which could either be in person, socially distanced, of course, but in person, where we've got people that are still going in, like traffic wardens, the enforcement officers, clean and green officers who have to deal with waste problems. So that they've been in person. We've done other virtual ones for staff like the Idea Store staff who are dispersed and doing different shifts. And we've done combinations. So we've done meetings on the ground with staff. We've done publicity. What we've organised is a phone bank where we're ringing round. We're attempting to ring round every member of Tower Hamlets Unison and remind them to vote. And that does have quite a positive effect, because people can see that if the union's ringing them up, we're taking it quite seriously, and people talk about it, and it has a knock-on effect of people speaking to other people. So these kind of have a, you know, they have a knock-on effect. Each meeting you do, people talk about it, and it reminds people to vote. Every phone call you make, people talk about that. So it kind of has a cumulative effect, and that's what we're trying to do. I mean, in the national ballot previously, the consultative one, it was 79%. Now, I've got no doubt that we're going to get a similar figure in favour of industrial action this time. The big problem, as you know, and probably, you know, your readers know is that the Tory anti-union legislation means that not only do you have to get a majority in favour, you now have to beat the 50% mark. So you have to get 50% plus one to actually have a legal strike in this country, which, you know, years ago would have seemed absolutely ridiculous. It would have seemed Orwellian that you would have to have a majority was no longer enough. You needed to reach this ridiculously high bar. But on top of that, in the digital age, in the 21st century, where everybody does, or even the smallest things electronically, we still have to do it in a very 20th century way. We have to do a postal ballot. So ballots get posted to people's home and then they've got to post them back. It's, you know, it's ridiculous given the digital age, but clearly the Tories like that because it makes it much harder, firstly, to get a majority. But now with this 50%, it's made it a Herculean task to get past the 50% mark. We did it before in Tower Rewards when we managed to get past it, but it is a huge hurdle. I think, you know, some people don't realise what a huge hurdle that is, and in some ways it has made national strikes in this country close to impossible to pull off. And it really is a terrible piece of legislation. I'm clearly, you know, I'm going to say that I'm a trade unionist, but in terms of fairness and morality, you know, the government have almost by the back door made it almost impossible to strike. So effectively, in a lot of ways, they've outlawed national strikes just by a kind of backdoor way of doing it. It's kind of morally wrong on top of everything else.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you do get the yes vote, I mean, I know you can't speak for the National Union, but what sort of action is being considered?
In a personal capacity, personally, I think a one-day strike would be ineffective. I don't think that. I think you have to, you know, there needs to be consideration to what you can do, but clearly the most effective way would be for all-out industrial action. But you know, that's not my decision to make, and you know, I respect the people that are in that difficult position of making that decision. But that would be what my personal opinion would be. But maybe we would start off with a series of strikes, but to escalate it. But you know, personally speaking, I think a one-day strike is never going to have the effect that we need. We've got a government with a large majority, which, you know, is quite literally laughing in our face. I think a serious industrial action is the only way forward. And I think for the first time for a long time, workers, because of the, you know, the combination of factors that we discussed previously, the pandemic, what the Tories have been up to in the past few months, I think it's actually hardened the resolve of people to take some action. And with all the rising pay, the rising inflation and mortgage rates, I think it's hardened people in a way that we haven't seen for a long time.
Yeah, that's really interesting to hear. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, and thank you so much, Kridos. And yeah, we'll be following your dispute.
Okay, thank you.